Good evening, everyone. I'm Lori Schuff, Superintendent of the Liberty School District, and I should say very, very proud Superintendent of a great school district. And we're so glad you all are here. That really just speaks to a great community as well to give up your time and be with us here this evening. We had originally scheduled this time to be a board study session. Unfortunately, due to illness and travel out of work, we don't have a quorum this evening. But we will still continue as a community budget meeting and just still have those same conversations with you and hear your good ideas and your feedback because that's really what we're after. Joining us here this evening from our governing board member Paul Bixler and governing board president Mark Aguirre are both here. So feel free to share other ideas with them and or with each other, and they'll be, of course, listening intently. Following this budget study session, this is the last of our four out in, I called it this budget study session. Let me get my record straight. This community meeting, following this, on Monday night, the governing board will be meeting again on a budget study session, and then we'll be making some decisions and recommendations to provide direction to administration for the coming school year. So this is important work, and we're glad you're here. And looking around the room, I can see PTO and parents and administrators and teachers and community members. So just hurrah for you for being here. So I'm just really going to jump right in for the most part. Let's just see what I have. And I think I'm just going to jump right into talking about the two things that we have to consider overall when we're developing a budget for the following year. Certainly, that's uppermost in our mind is the failure of our override election, which requires the district to reduce its budget by $850,000. And that we'll talk about a little bit later, how in the second year and the third year, depending on whether it passes or not. So the first thing we're going to talk about is how, what are some ideas around that? And then the second thing we'll talk about is how do we address the future growth of the district and kind of put that all together in one budget. Kelly, will you advance? Let me just see where this is at. So in front of you is our two documents, and we are going to look at the one that says draft override reduction budget interests. And what you see here are a list of budget interests. These are just ideas that some people have generated. We've been talking with teachers, staff, parents. We've been talking about this now really probably since the end of November, trying to start to gather ideas out with stakeholders. And the reason why we're gathering those ideas is so that we can take the time to develop, like, how much would those ideas cost? How much would they generate in savings? And then now we're bringing them back out to groups like you to say, which of these ideas resonate with you? Is there a different idea you have, or is there a variation of an idea you have? So what we're going to do is I'm going to just walk you through as briefly as I can so I can save your time for conversation. I'm going to walk you through an explanation of what these things are and just some high-level kind of pros and cons for them. And as I'm talking them through, if you would kind of create some type of annotation or marking next to them to say, yeah, that one sounds like a better idea than maybe this one, or a little note to yourself reminding yourself later. Because at the end, I'm going to ask you to talk about it as a group and kind of give some rationale for your thinking. And you're going to be in, maybe 3-4 groups when we finish that. And then I'm going to be asking you to individually say what your thoughts were for 4 of them that you think show the most promise for helping our district to make these decisions. Okay? So take whatever notes you want. You're the only ones who'll see that. So it looks like I probably ought to have one of these in front of me. So hang on. Do you have an extra? I don't want to take yours. She went to make copies. Well, then I'm taking hers. Isn't that nice of me? Okay, we'll jump right in. So these are not in an order because they've been, different groups might prioritize them differently, and each of the groups we've met with this week have even prioritized them differently. So it's just a list, kind of like a laundry list. So the first one, elimination of maintenance and operation funded extracurricular activities. This means that all of our after-school sports and our sponsors for student council, yearbook, and science olympiad. I always feel like it's a test, and I barely can remember all three things. So those are the things that those would be eliminated for, and you can see in the cost for an estimate of $161,000. Line 2 is a 4-day school week for all students. And this would kind of be the concept roughly that instead of a 5-day school week, it'd be a 4-day school week, Tuesday through Friday, avoiding Mondays where there's a lot of holidays anyway, eliminating the half-day early release, adding an hour on to 4 of the days. And so you roughly are getting the same number of instructional hours in the school year by going to a 4-day week. The potential cost savings arises through the reduction of utilities 1 day a week, as long as you don't have a bunch of people in the buildings, needing air conditioning, as well as a reduction of transportation costs. We can realize some reduction in transportation costs, but we actually also lose some revenue by reduced miles, transportation miles, out of a different fund. So it's kind of a plus and a minus. This one is, I would say, a very soft number. Because you don't actually know what savings you would realize until you actually did this example. And decrease instructional minutes for special area classes. As you recall, the override had key things that were listed that our voters voted on to say whether they would approve the override or not. One of them was class sizes. One of them was our special area classes of art, music, and PE. And so in this case, trying to be creative, the budget interest here is like, well, how do you not just cut one of the 3 special area classes? How could you apply a reduction to all 3 of them without having students lose out altogether on art, music, and PE? So while not, really what we think is best, but art, music, and PE could be cut shorter class periods by 5 minutes. So instead of 40-minute class periods, they'd be 35-minute class periods. And it's a little bit similar to how we were handling during more COVID-restricted times when we were shortening the classes and putting more time in between classes. So that has an impact also of creating, instead of a 10-period day, an 11-period day. That also has an impact on all of our teachers having 5 minutes less per day of preparation time. The unintended benefit is it does bring more instructional minutes back to that we could apply specifically to English language arts and mathematics. And we are short in instructional minutes in English language arts at the middle school grades. For class size and maximum adjustment, this we've actually modeled in several ways, and I'll talk to you about a couple of them. This one for approximately $490,000 is the assumption that kindergarten through 3rd grade class size targets remain exactly the same as what they've been, keeping those low as they have been. And it probably has the biggest impact to 4th and 5th grade. Welcome, we're glad you're here. 4th and 5th grade, and then 6th, 7th, and 8th grade with a slight increase there. So it would put those classes for a maximum, target would be 31 and a maximum of 35. With that, you would see this kind of a savings. A similar savings to this would be if every grade level just added +1 to this target. It would be about the same, but you'd be applying some of that pain, if you will, of class size addition to the K-3. And then the third way we've modeled this is if it was +2 to every class. That has, about $200,000 even more savings than what you see here, but it has an even larger impact to class sizes up to a maximum of 36 in those upper grades, and the lower grades are also affected as well. So just people have asked us to model it in different ways. The one you see here is really just an addition to 4th through 8th grade. And those class sizes are seemingly kind of, they do not seem to be, from what we can tell, larger than what our surrounding school districts are. They're probably a little more comparable for a maximum size. And full day kindergarten tuition. Our parents may not realize that how schools receive their funding, it's per pupil, and we get a full $4,400 per pupil for first grade through 8th grade students. But our kindergarten students only get half of the funds, because really all our state funds is half-day kindergarten. Our district and other districts have long time believed that early childhood education is really, really critical. So we have looked for other funds within our own district budget to be able to pay that other half. So you will see on this, or you may choose to offer that up as a suggestion. We could go back to a half-day program where it's half-day, and if parents want to pay for enrichment for the other half of the day, they could pay that amount. Some downsides to that from our past history is that it was difficult to collect those funds. Our children missed out on important instruction, particularly that literacy instruction. And finally, that class of students was smaller because our parents chose to go someplace else that offered free full-day kindergarten, and then we didn't see those children come back. So we actually lost them for 9 years instead of just for 1 year. So it has some unintended consequences, even though it really does would help us to balance it and do what really the state expects. Let's see. The next few, I'd say 6 through 9, all are related to particular programs at specific schools. And I think the reason why these budget interests were offered up as an idea to consider is that all of our schools don't actually receive additional funds for signature programs. And those that do, like Las Brisas, we fund one additional position to help balance the classes between English and dual language. And at Estrella Mountain, we fund a half-time Spanish teacher because without offering Spanish at that school, they would not be able to be licensed as an international baccalaureate school. And so those things are additional funds that are given to those specific schools that truly is not equitable compared to all the other schools, but essential to be able to offer the bare minimum of those programs. So just know that if those considerations were highly voted on, then that means that there's a risk for those programs needing to change in some way. All right, 4-day kindergarten week. That idea is if you know that 4 out of 5 is 80%. We said that we get paid for 50% of a child. Well, now we'd only have to come up with the other 30% instead of another 50%, so it is a budget savings. The downside of that option is that our teachers then would receive 80% compensation, and we don't know how many of our kindergarten teachers would stick around with us if we were only willing to offer them 80%. Now, those who would like a 4-day work week and less money, it might be appealing to them. All right, now line 11, we have instructional coaches at each campus that support our new teachers, that support all of our teachers in growing their skills and confidence and competency so that we can improve student learning. The idea here that was suggested is that not all of our schools are the same in size. Some are much larger than others. So instead of applying an equal one for every campus, maybe we should look at our 2 smallest schools sharing an instructional coach. So, that makes a lot of sense from that logic. And then also consider, though, that the caseload of teachers that they have by even if there are smaller numbers on both campuses, it would exceed what our average and higher enrollment classes are, so that they really would have a larger workload than everybody else, and then perhaps their effectiveness would be compromised. Then where you see in gray coming up, 12 through 16, one of those, the reduction of extracurricular activities, this is an example where you would choose the elimination, or you would choose the reduction, or you would choose a pay-to-play. You wouldn't be able to select all of those because those kind of are just variations of things. So the reduction was the idea that don't really want to see something eliminated. How could we just take a reduction in this first, a first year and hopefully the only year of loss of the override? So the idea here is you would keep the club sponsor stipends, eliminate the athletic directors at the schools, the administrators would take responsibility for the athletics, and the athletic teams would be reduced. So instead of having more than one team for a particular sport, there'd be one girls team, one boys team, and there would be 3 sports seasons a year instead of 4. So it's just overall, it's a reduction. And in reality, this is actually a model that's pretty similar to other school districts. We've had a very nice, rich athletic program here. So that could be an option to reduce it, but you can see that it's a difference of about $100,000 of savings between eliminating it or reducing it. But both could be options. And then the pay-to-play is, we currently have a little bit of a pay-to-play. We have a $25 fee, but we don't generate a lot of revenue with that pay-to-play because we have a number of students who have hardship, and what we do is we pretty readily waive that fee for families with hardship, because what we really are trying, our philosophy has been, we want to avoid the situation where the haves get programs and resources and the have-nots don't get those things. So that you can see there is the unintended consequence here of just having people pay to have that extra activity. That makes a lot of sense, but the downside is our more affluent schools might see a lot of participation, our less affluent schools just really might not have these opportunities. So those are some options there. So those are the ideas that have really kind of come up in lots of places. There have been a lot of like single one-off things that that we don't have listed out here yet. You'll probably hear some more of those in the governing board meeting on Monday. What I'd like to do now is let you all talk in groups, and maybe if you 3 didn't mind just joining, over here, and then we can have some kind of more robust conversations. I'll answer some questions, but your job when you're talking about, just talk about what you think makes sense. None of these are happy ideas. We didn't come here tonight to go, oh, I'm going to be so fired up and excited to be doing this. These are not fun things to talk about, to consider, because they ultimately, are taking services away from our kids. They're affecting essentially instruction overall. So you're going to say what you think about some of these, but you also are going to surface revised ideas. Like, I'd like to see this model to slightly different than what this was proposed at, or I want this totally new idea I have, and we want to consider that. So you're talking about what's here, but you're also talking about any other ideas that you would add. Okay, so questions? Yes, and I did gloss over that. So that idea would be that for those who are getting dual language instruction, that's something extra, and because it's less efficient to staff when we have to split a grade level up by English and DLI, because it costs us more to do that than applying some type of a fee to the parents. And I believe you modeled it at $350 for the school year for that dollar amount. I think that was the dollar amount, and the idea also was that maybe, we don't know, we'd have to check with our auditors, that may be eligible for tax credit donations to offset that for parents, but recognizing that some parents are comfortable writing a check for $350 and waiting several months for them to get the benefit of that at tax time, and others, they're paycheck to paycheck, and they can't let go of $350 for a week, let alone several months. So we just recognize that has hardship, perhaps. Okay, you can talk, and I'll come over.
I don't understand how decreasing our instructional time saves that.
Good. Thank you. I did not share that. So when we look at how many new classes of general education classrooms we'll have next year, we're growing, right? We grew like 12% this year. We're expected to grow 5.6% next year. When we apply how many new teachers, special area teachers, we would have to add to manage the same schedule we have now, that equates to paying for those new teachers. What this allows us to do is maintain our current staffing and just operate a little bit more efficiently at a cost to special area instruction, hardship for the teachers, but we have kept art, music, and PE for all kids. So, yeah, thank you for that question. One more question? You're right. From year to year, we've looked at how that matches out. And this past year and the year before, we gave an extra teacher in the staffing to Las Brisas. In actuality, you probably could have used even an extra one beyond that. We just couldn't afford it. And so then that's where your situation was you had a split class, a combo class to help because you had kind of a little small amount here and a little small amount there. Couldn't afford to make that a whole teacher and that one a whole teacher. We put them together as a combination class. So right now, this is just the idea that we had one extra in the budget for the whole school. Mm-hmm. Right. So again, all those are options and considerations, and your job now is to try to prioritize those. You are having conversations about what would kind of be equivalent to $850,000 because that's the kind of the number we're reaching for. The reason why you see these things all connected to things that were in the override election pamphlet is because that's what we told our voters, was at risk, and that's what they were voting on. 100% of everything in the override election was connected to classroom instruction. And all of these things are categories of things that go directly to the classroom, unfortunately. All right, so I'll let you have conversations, and then we can talk about other ideas you have.
So what we'll do, we'll all be one group. They'll kind of all be one group. So basically what we've done with all the other meetings is you all just kind of look down through here and don't necessarily worry about adding anything else. Don't worry about that. Look down here and what's something, and this is how I categorize. What's something that hurts and what's something that uncomfortable. Okay? So that's what it kind of comes down to. And we'll get kind of more deep into voting and what that looks like after we kind of go through this exercise with everyone. So. Thoughts? Anyone? Go ahead and speak up. Those very same arguments that you just made have all been made at all the different schools. So while you guys are thinking, I'm going to throw one more thing in there to give you something to think about. This is year one of the reduction. There's nothing that holds the school district back from going out for the override come this November. So, potentially, and this is kind of where the twist is for everyone, potentially, this could be just 1 year of uncomfortableness. So now, to where you all can start thinking about comfortableness, hurting, elimination. go out and visit schools to see something extra to see ones that don't. Also, I would consider it as something we look with Christians and hope and look, figure out, is there one particular area or couple areas where a large number, a good portion out of Nova in these areas, go after those schools in those areas to trigger a vote response in the upcoming override. I don't want to be punitive here, but what could we do to maybe draw more people out? Anyway, someone mentioned that this kind of thing happens in
Don't do it.
one of the districts near Phoenix.
No, but I do.
And
And next year, that's going to be interesting.
Last time it happened here, we had to cut quite a bit, and it passed the next year.
Maybe.
So, and she is right, that grade, I mean, my niece is a sophomore now, and she was a kindergartner when we did it, and their class was small, but through their whole school, from kindergarten all the way to 8th, and it did hurt, but the next year, our override did pass it. But yes.
And then maybe if it's been more than enough, let's shuffle some of the things in today. Now that's a close one, which is so the way that it works is you look at it in terms. Like,
Arizona's been cutting our budget every year, and so how do we maintain the same programs and the same stuff when every single year they give less and less money, but we're expected to do the same things, if not more, every year?
And those, I mean, I understand that, but that's the thing that people are like on the current know. Like you can say, well, you know, the people, I mean, I have one that is really great. I mean, that school plus I the solution was send his kids higher grade, right? Imagine if I didn't have that extra activity, I would have to find another place. Two of equal to, I mean, it's amazing to have young kids in our community. Like,
so look at this table. What are your thoughts? So as an example, I'm assuming you're talking about dual language for Las Brisas, and then same mag for Westar, right? Well, so with the Spanish of Estrella, that's what Dr. Sharp was talking about, of the baccalaureate program, you have to provide Spanish. So if you eliminate Spanish, then essentially what you've done is you've eliminated the baccalaureate. Right? So that one's more than elimination on that one. But like the other ones that I just described, those are correct. What you said, that's not an elimination. That's a okay. So we're not going to go with one teacher to 13 kids. We're going to go one teacher to say 20 kids. You just round it, right? So that way when you get to that 13, well, we still only need 20, if you will. Right? So that's where these ratios come into play. That is all wages lowest class size in the district for boarding house. Okay. Oh, we have a look. And what
Average,
Dr. Yeah,
average class size.
what Dr. Shuck was talking about. For K through 3, there would be no change. Those would be where they are. I believe they're at 24. 24, does that sound right? K through 3? Yeah, 24, right? Okay. Now, 4 through 8, it would go. So she's going to talk about it here in a minute. I believe it's 4, 5 goes to 26, 27.
So what, how does our schools that averages for the whole district?
For the 4-day school week,
So you've been talking about the items that are on here. Push yourselves in your thinking to, even if you have to split into 2 groups to get more conversation here, think about, is there a variation that you would like to see, or is there a new idea that you have of a way to address this? So if you surface any new ideas, and in probably about 3 more minutes, I'm going to ask you to individually think of what your 4 best ideas are.
so for the 4-day school week, would the LEAP program increase? Would they offer a bigger program and hire more teachers, like more people to watch after the kids that parents can't? You know, I mean, there's
More than likely, that's what would happen, right? But the thing to remember is LEAP, which is the after-school care, that is very similar to the lunch program, that it's self-sufficient.
right,
The district doesn't make any money off of it. It just
Right.
pays for itself.
right.
So
Then they're in the building,
the,
right? Isn't the point of the 4-day work week though to
To
have
save.
to save money on the utilities and things? So
it would be the one day. So you're only talking 1 day, right, of nobody's at
but it would be where LEAP is, right? If LEAP was running on
LEAP
that
would
day.
run.
Would only be 2 schools.
Wait, okay. I apologize.
Yeah.
That you were talking about for that day off.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
That I don't have the answer.
And that's what I'm
I
saying.
thought
Like
you were
that
talking
is
about
difficult
the
to.
extra.
Yeah.
So more
No.
people, you understand? More
Yes.
people would be in the LEAP program and extra help. I apologize.
Okay. That's kind of.
We have so many kids that miss on Mondays as it is. It's like, oh, it's the first day of the week. School? What's the district in Tonopah that does 4-day week? Yes. Saddle Mountain or yeah, it is. And so then the high school did it, and then all the grade schools also went to it.
Can I offer this?
I'm just curious.
I'm gonna offer this about something.
And they work 4-day work.
They not only have it's a 4-day work week times
Yeah.
so
A lot of parents in this district are 2 parents that work outside the home. Even if, I mean, honestly, I work 3 days at home, 2 days out of it, but I'm working at home. So I mean, my child is a little older, so it would be a little bit easier maybe, but it would put a strain, I think, on that 4 day. Don't get me wrong, I would love a 4-day work week too.
if I could offer a suggestion about the Jen, if I could offer kind of a little bit of a look at the 4-day week, because I'm hearing that quite a bit, is the one thing to also think about with the 4-day week is that over half the students, half our families, they qualify for free and reduced lunches. Free and reduced lunches. Over half. Over half. Okay. So that kind of tells you where our demographic is, right? As far as on the financial side. But then also, so that means there's probably two parents working, maybe a single parent constantly working 5 days a week. But then the other thing to think about with a four-day work week is that there's going to be a day where them kids aren't here. Well, the one thing that we did learn in the pandemic is that one day, that's one day that that child, there's going to be children that aren't getting meals. And there's that one day that they might be in a situation that is an abusive situation, and that school is the safe space. That's something that we try not to, overlook, but that's always something to think about. I was right, that we're going to save money, but there's a cost, and sometimes it's not monetarily. Right? But these are things that
All right, so I'm going to have you take a moment, reflect individually now, and you do not have to make them total $850,000. This is not a math test at this point. So and we know that you might pick 4 little piddly ones and they don't add up, but these are still what you think are your 4 best options. So the red sticker, even though it's got a 1 on it, it'll have the most value because it's your top choice. It's what you think is our best first solution, and then you will do the second, third, and fourth choices. Okay, and you're going to place them up here. Mr. Guire?
before we do that, so I told the gentleman here again, he had asked a really good question. And what he was wondering was about the information with the voter turnout and what that voter turnout looked like. And if we could, I'm not sure who's. Okay, so here we are. So as you can see, we lost by 343 votes. Now, Dr. Schaff, she's got the numbers in her head. So she's going to tell you real quick about, and then Joel's going to say something. She's going to tell you of what those voters, look like. Were those parents? Were those single parents? What was it, Dr. Schaff?
So our voter turnout, 24%, 6,329 voters. 50% of those were 50 years of age and older. 25% were 65 years of age and older. So if you think about the 4,300 students we have in this school district, and they all have 1 to 3 or 4 parents, do the math on that. We need our parents front and center on an election. It's really, really critical for them to understand, to be talking about it, to be activated. We don't stand a chance unless our parents are really stepping up here, and our staff as well.
Mr.
Yes,
Jones?
ma'am. Pass the mic. And she's got a question then. So we have limitations, legal limitations. We're not allowed to send anything home with kids, and we have to be all kinds of rules about how we communicate. So really the only people who could truly communicate about this once an election is called for, I'm allowed to do it right now, otherwise I wouldn't be allowed to do this right now. Once the election is called for, the Political Action Committee, which is made up of parents and stakeholders, they're the ones who organize and get things out there and communicated. They're the only ones, and as you said, you're right, I believe you, parents and community members, that's where the power is. But it can't come from the school district. We're not allowed to. Well, I never like to say I told you so. Mr. John.
I would love to see, you probably don't have this information now, and I could find it as well eventually, but I would love to see a breakdown by precinct, how the vote was. It'd be interesting to see where, what areas had maybe a disproportionate amount of no votes. Anyway, I doubt that's something you have at the moment, but it'd be interesting to see.
Yes.
In that aspect, for what you're saying about the parents, I've ran into a whole bunch of parents doing different things around the school, and like there's half of them I spoke to have no idea about the voting. And so I brought it up and it's like, hey, did you know this didn't pass? And they're like, oh my god, no, I didn't know. How come I didn't know? There has to be a way to get it out in a better aspect.
Yeah, I mean, look how many flyers and all that we have to go. I mean, we can only do so much. We can't make other people take flyers. We can't.
The opportunity is also to get our parents registered to vote right now, because if you look and say voter turnout was 24%, that's of the registered voters. So we need all of our parents, you know, that are eligible to vote and to be registered to be ready to go. And then they will receive the voting pamphlet and the vote by mail in the mail, given the opportunity to vote. But if they aren't a registered voter, it never came to their mailbox, despite the postcards that got mailed home to them saying, please vote yes, and here's why it's great. They wouldn't have received it. Chris, Kenyon?
Yeah, I want to say Mark and his family did a heck of a job getting a lot of those signs, you know, hammered in all over the valley, all over our district. And thank you for that. How much of that made an impact? I hope a lot of these yes votes came from that. But it definitely is going to take more than flyers and signs. It's going to take conversations. It's going to take people to explain what this is. I think one of the biggest faults is it being called an override. And I'm sure you guys have heard that a lot, because nobody can override their own budget. Everybody has a home budget, right? We all work with budgets. You can't just go over your budget. You'll go bankrupt. A budget continuum maybe, working on our wording, working on how we get this out to the community, letting them know that if this doesn't pass, here's the consequence. Because I don't think people understand that. They don't understand that a budget override affects their kids as much as it does. So.
Yeah, language is everything. We advertise it as budget continuation. What's on the voter pamphlet is what's required legally to be said there. And the good news is for last year, is the choice was, do you wish to continue this, yes or no? Now going forward, it's going to say, do you wish to increase? So it's an even more uphill climb the next time around. All right, so I'm going to get us back on track, although I love the conversation, because that's exactly what we need, is people thinking about what would this take, how can you band together to make a difference? Because it's pretty clear with 343 votes, every vote matters. You know, you think, oh, it doesn't matter if I don't get that up there and drop it in the mail. Every vote actually really matters, especially in a small community. All right. So before we go up there, I just want to hear, you know, maybe one or two big ideas of a rationale, an idea that you thought might be a good choice for us to consider as a budget cut, or if you have a new idea that you want the governing board to consider, will you share that? So Alex has a microphone, and then if somebody from this table over here might say one or two ideas that you talked about that you kind of were more in agreement on.
I'll get started for our group. One of the things that I had brought up and that we talked about at our table under number 13, pay to participate increase, would be, yes, to increase that, but also explore the opportunities for scholarships and sponsors. So, you know, we understand that these opportunities can be given to kids who otherwise wouldn't be given them, right? In terms of sports, in terms of other things like that. And with a sponsor for families that are able to sponsor another student and be able to pay, you know, if it's $50 to participate right now, it's $25, I think they mentioned. So increase it to $50. And then, you know, I would pay an extra $100 or whatever to sponsor another kid and give, you know, parents that opportunity to do that. So that, and then scholarships for if should we go with the DLI participation fee mentioned at $350, if, we found people who would, again, sponsor or provide scholarships to other kids, they could use that as a tax write-off and it would kind of be a benefit. So that was one of the ideas we came up with over here.
Thank you. Middle group, the bottom half of the middle group over here, do you have some ideas? One or two?
The only idea that I have is what I see. I know throughout the district, every school has a little bit different where they're at with their class sizes, but really if you look at the dollar amount, I think that's going to help with what we're doing the most without having to touch more of these. That's kind of what we're looking at and what we see. And if it's only, depending on which direction we end up going, whether it be just touching 4th through 8th or plus 2 on every class, we'll have to decide that later. But I think we're all in agreement that that's probably the biggest part that we can tackle.
All right, thank you. How about this group?
It's all right. I'm good. The 4-day kindergarten, what we had talked about. Things of that nature.
No, I did not.
Go ahead.
What was the thing with the sports and instead to have 4?
Oh, so reduction versus elimination?
Yes.
Okay. Right now,
what do you-
we offer 2 teams, kind of like a junior varsity and a varsity team
Yeah.
for every girls' sport and every boys' sport. So 2 teams for every sport, and we have 4 seasons. So that's 2 times 4. We have 8 teams right now currently. The way this one was modeled would be we'd have 3 seasons. I'm sorry, I was wrong about that. We had girls and boys, girls and boys. We had 4 teams times 4 seasons. We have 16 teams that we fund right now. Going forward, with the way this one would be modeled, there would be 3 seasons times just 1 girls team, 1 boys team. So a total of 6 teams. So it would be a reduction, kind of similar to a junior high girls team and a junior high boys team for basketball, for soccer, for
So it would be less kids.
that's exactly right. It still would be less kids.
So this is just, so I've worked at several schools in the district, and I'm just curious, because I'm at a new school for me this year. But I know in the past, at some of the other schools I worked at, we were having trouble recruiting enough students to even fill our teams. And we were having to go and find 6th graders or 5th graders to play on our 7th and 8th grade teams. And I also know that in recent years we've had trouble finding coaches as well and so it's just, I don't know if we have any statistics on that or, but sometimes I just wonder about that in our, because I run student council with Shonda, and so I see the value of some of our extracurriculars and things, but I do know that at some of the schools, now post-pandemic at my current school, I don't think we've had trouble getting enough students this year, but we've all been in our houses for, I don't know, so I don't, but I just curious.
Yes, that is exactly true. I just would say that's factual. Okay, how about, yes?
Help. I don't need the microphone.
We do just because we're recording.
We're recording.
Well, never mind. I could speak louder. So we said maybe invite the community and maybe have parents help us, and maybe they can be the coach. Maybe or
volunteer.
Yeah, volunteer to do some other things that, like.
If we saw an elimination or reduction in schools, we're looking to have volunteer programs. Where you likely wouldn't be able to do is have the cross-school competition, because you might not have an equivalent team at another school, but you probably could still offer some type of intramurals if you had volunteers or things like that, where you could still, it's not like they couldn't do anything, it's just they would have the limitation of lack of budget funding for it. All right. This team, do you have new ideas or ideas that resonated with all of you?
I think this group was a little bit interesting because we have parents and teachers and parents of different grade levels. So, I mean, we saw the plus and minus on so many different items on here that we didn't really have one that kind of worked for everybody at the group. But there was just a lot of good information that talked about. Oh yeah, the decrease of the special area classes. We could see that that would be a beneficial, both parents, students, and teachers, all around the board. That seemed like the best option.
Kind of a compromise, if you will, right? Yeah. All right. All right, so now your job is to individually, again, the one that's got a 1, the red, that's your first choice. And the blue is your 4th choice. If you had a new idea, and I don't know that I heard a new idea that actually would be a budget dollar we could associate with. There's a new idea. Alex will put up a new poster over there. We'll write that down with a marker, and you can put your dot on it, and anybody else can join you and say, I like that idea too, and I'll put that up there. Okay, so we'll just let you take your stickers, walk over there, and contemplate it. Does anybody have an idea that they would like to add on there that they want other people to consider?
It says elimination of M&O funding, extracurricular, but then here it says non-M&O. What is the what is not considered?
That should be all.
Oh, okay, okay. That's what I'm like.
Number 1 is
That's your first choice. I'll add the value afterwards. First choice is what to eliminate.
I don't think anyone gave me an extra,
On the back
so I think everybody will just vote unless you have a. Yeah, so if you want- I'll steal it.
I'll also, the ELI class I was actually.
Yes, sir. Yeah, mommy, daddy.
I didn't follow directions very well.
That's good though. I saw that.
All right, is anyone not put up all their dots yet? Oh, I'm trying to trip people. Almost. All right, we're going to do the last. It sounds like half. It doesn't sound like I'm going to. It'll take less than half the time, but it is the second part of what we're going to do tonight. So if you look over there, you can just see where there's some things that are resonating with people. Lots of red over there, increased class size maximum. That shows that that was a lot of people's first choice. A lot of dots, but also a higher value there. So now what we're going to talk about is the other kind of big challenge our district faces, and that is that we are a growing district, and that is typically really great news, and it really still is. We grew 12% this year. We're expected to grow about 5.6% next year. So when we start to craft a budget, we keep one, like a guiding principle is how do we have the dollars go to children where it matters the most, and that is in the classroom. So what we aspire to, we kind of have a lofty goal, and we can keep trying to push to get to this. We aspire to get 70% of all of our dollars to go to the classroom and only 30% to go to operations. Okay? So here is a budget of the pie chart of all of the categories within the budget. And here on the left side is 57% goes to instruction. And and then the next one is student support. That would be things like counselors, psychologists. And the last 5% is instructional support. That would be things like instructional coaches, people who write district curriculum, and support with that. So those three categories of the budget are what constitute what's considered dollars to the classroom. So this year we did really well. We got to 69%. And so therefore, the rest of the percentages you see here. Well, that appropriation of the budget when we were smaller and to now where we are now and to where we're going in the future, we try to keep those budget categories proportionate as we grow. And here's why. So over time, for the instruction part, we have been right at about 57 to 58%. And that, if I was to give you some circles backwards, we've done that for several years. When we look at instruction compared to our peer districts, this does include more funds than just our maintenance and operations, because that's the only information I have that's comparable to other districts. We're at 59% actually, and 4% higher than any of the other peer districts. Okay, so we really do make that strong commitment to putting our dollars to instruction. Instruction really is teacher salaries and benefits primarily. On the administration side, here we are second to the bottom of the dollars to administration. Okay, so that means is we are the lowest among our peers for administration and the highest. So where would we have more capacity in our budget is actually in the instruction side. But we're really super proud of that, and we really don't want to be cutting there, but that is where we have extra, if you will. Okay, and then here's our projected budget limits. We're here. For this next year, we have to reduce by $850,000. That was what we just talked about. If we lose an election in the future, that gap continues to widen. And it's 10% of our operating budget. So over time, that's going to actually keep increasing. Not just, it'll be more than $3 million over time. Okay? Kelly, go again. 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 I'm doing things a lot out of order today. Keep going. I don't think it was working from this far away, Rob. I know you were trying to get me to use it. Keep going. Okay, you can stop here. So when we think about the operations side of the district and the classroom side, so that 70-30, a split, we have to think about that for all the dollars that we're going to get for an increase, because we're going to get increased dollars because we have an increased number of students. So when we think about how to spend that, we're trying to spend it responsibly, proportionately, so that we can apply for that growth. So you all know that if I had classroom teachers and I had 30 kids and I had one teacher, okay. But if I go to 40 students, we both know that, okay, that's going to require 2 teachers. We're going to have to add additional teachers for that next year, for that class or that grade level. Well, the same thing happens with other positions in the district out of school. So we add a school, that school gets larger, now we need to add an assistant principal at the school. That school gets larger, a couple schools get larger, now we need some additional psychologists. So we have to grow all the areas of the district, but we try to do it proportionately because we don't want to overspend on school administration. We don't want to overspend on maintenance and operations, but we want to make sure that we are still growing those categories because they are already low or very low. If we don't grow with it, then they will be completely inefficient or inoperable as you get too big to be able to process accounts payable, process HR applications, et cetera. So here are the things that if we just didn't do anything else and we were on a regular schedule with our budget, we would say we're going to need to add 10 more teachers for how many more students we're going to have next year. We'd need a half a reading interventionist, 1.3 school psychologists, and so forth over there on the maintenance and operations side. The operations pieces. And these items over here are the things that affect both classroom and operations. And an example here is 2% compensation increase for all staff. So the budget that you were looking at that's just modeled, we modeled it at 2% increase for all staff. Because you can imagine if you thought, well, that should be 4%, double the number. If you think that should be 1%, cut that number in half. And you can see that's what it would take to provide compensation. This past year, the state provided inflation for schools at 1.2%. Actual inflation was above 5%. So by law, with this, the minimum wage law, we have to make that increase by the 5 point whatever percent it was to increase our support staff wages for that minimum wage. But we didn't get more money to be able to pay for that, right? So that had to come from someplace. So in this case, we had 1.2%, and our employees experienced more than 5% inflation rate. So this is modeled at pretty much the maximum we get for inflation would be 2%, so we're hoping that we would get that, and we've modeled it at that amount. But you all at your tables could say, I think it should be something different, and then you just tell us what that is. And the same with these other things. Assistant principal, for example, at Blue Horizon and Las Brisas. Those 2 schools are expected to be at 700 or more students this next school year. So at that point is when our district makes those assistant principals full-time assistant principals because of the caseload of students, parents, programs at a school that need support. Another example on here is bus drivers. You can imagine we've got more routes as we grow, so that's more bus drivers, more fuel costs. And then the director of maintenance and transportation. It's one position split funded between 2 budget categories. And this is a position that was in place in 2008, 2009. It was cut at that time because of budget cuts. But since that time, we've grown a great number of students, and we've actually increased 2 whole schools in the amount of time since that happened. So for administratively to put that position back into place. So these are the things that we would consider if we were trying to responsibly grow and stay within all those budget categories. But recognizing that it's hard to think about adding something to the budget, at the same time we're having to think about how do you decrease in the budget. So I want you to talk at your tables about these ideas and say, do those make sense to you? Or are you thinking that we should make less of a reduction over here by eliminating something on the page? Okay? Hard conversations to think about how to grow the district at the same time. So, chat away. end. All right, some of you were asking about, this is a way of looking at all of our subcategories of the budget. And remember I showed you what we were this past year, and I said if we did $850,000 of cuts to instruction, a place where we really don't want to, but that's where the money is, and that's where the override items were. If we did that, what happens to instruction of the overall budget? It drops it by 1%. So the part that I feel relieved about is if it was something along these lines, we are still at 56%, which is still 3 or 4% higher than our peers. Or I'm sorry, 1%, because I think the next one down was 55%. So that's good, and all of these other, even with these additions and these reductions, all of these other categories of the budget are basically the same, except for one of them that changed by 1%. So it doesn't have a big impact on how we were aspiring to keep that proportion consistent with minimizing the things to operations. Okay, so it's just some background information. So you've had a little chance to have some conversation. Does anyone have an idea of something they would not do here to be able to do something else? Is there something that you don't think is appropriate here, or would like to see something else considered for us to address growth in the district? Okay, I'm just go table by table, and you can kind of give me a yes, I do, and I'll give you a mic. Anything over here? So you kind of felt like this is the way to go. All right, you guys, you thought this was the way to go. How about back here at this table? Did you guys have a different idea about the growth? I'm gonna move the microphone over here. I think there's some ideas here someplace.
I don't know if there are ideas. We're trying to get clarification. Still trying to comprehend this. This sheet here is what we were trying to. As I understand it, the goal here is to, because of growth, if we are going to allocate money for these various things, to prioritize for growth. That's the goal here, and what we think is a priority under each of these categories.
In this case, all of these things fit within the subcategories. They do. So a lot of other cuts of suggested ideas have already been reduced out. I think that the bigger idea here is if these things make sense, if we were going to grow and we had to add to the district to address our growth, have we picked the right things? And if you say, yes, we've picked the right things, then the next question logically to ask is, we're having to add in a time of budget reduction, are these things important enough to still add and still make the reductions you suggested over here on the wall? Because it all comes together into one budget.
So kind of to add some context to this portion of it is if you don't grow your personnel as your student population expands, as we stand right now, there are actions that will take place because of that lack of action. Administrators, as an example, in this district, you saw that we have the lowest amount and the lowest amount of money that goes to them. So if you add more work on top of an administrator, what keeps them here? Just something to think about. The same goes with raises, and they just put the 2% on there because that's kind of a standard that we've done over the last few years. At a time when teachers are leaving and you can't even get them replaced back, and they're not leaving for pay, they're leaving for other things, right? Well, if you cut their pay, where are we going to go to find them? Because we can't find them now.
Anything you would do differently for growth? Anything you would suggest that was different? Okay. All right, you all did some hard work tonight. So I would tell you your next hard work is to go communicate with the people that you have around you to help build their understanding of the hard things that our district is faced with, and recognize that you all came up with some solutions that are, you heard the words uncomfortable but not entirely painful, but you can imagine if we have to face another $850,000 next year, we might very well be out of that uncomfortable phase. So help us with communication. We would invite you to come to the governing board meeting on Monday. The study session will begin at 4:30, and the regular board meeting will just follow immediately. So we would invite you to come and participate. Yes, anyone can attend the budget study session at 4:30. Yes. And if in a study session format, you know, if you wanted to engage back and forth, you certainly could. And during the regular board meeting part, you would just have to do a call to the public because the budget is also on the regular board agenda. Right? I can't thank you enough for giving up your evenings and coming to do hard things, making your brains hurt and your hearts will hurt a little bit. But thank you for coming, and it shows some just great participation by our community, by all of you being here. Thank you very much.